This is my most anticipated book of 2024. I just picked up my copy. I'm going to sit down in this chair and I am not getting up until I finish it. After 6 years, we finally get a new Haruki Murakami novel. Has it lived up to my anticipation of being the best release of 2024? And is it a mistake to start here if you've never read any of his other novels? Let's talk about it. The City and Its Uncertain Walls by Haruki Murakami opens to a nameless 17-year-old boy in an intense, burning, all-consuming relationship with his first girlfriend of 16, who is telling him about a town with high walls, three bridges, and a library where she works. In this town, the real her lives. This is when she reveals that the her that is currently sitting next to him isn't the real her, but a type of wandering shadow, and that if he wants to be able to find the real her, then he'll need to wish with all of his heart to be able to find this town. Because once he does, he'll be able to fill the only open position, which would be working besides her at the library as a dream reader. Eventually, one day she does disappear, leaving behind a million questions of what if and what could have been that he can never solve until his search begins for his lost love. But is it even possible to find the same pure, innocent love that they once shared now that he's middle aged and experienced more of life? I don't know. This concept of the story of the town was originally published as a novella in the literary magazine Bungakukai in 1980, but Murakami wasn't quite satisfied, never allowing this to be republished into a book. He took another stab at it in 1985 with Hardboiled Wonderland, turning it into a double feature. So if you have read that, then you will be familiar with the idea. As time has marched on and he has matured into the author he is today, this story remained in the back of his mind, so he decided to take one more attempt at it. And I was wondering if this was supposed to be a sequel of Hardboiled Wonderland, but that is not the case. You could call this a rewrite of it done by an older and more reminiscent Murakami, reevaluating the story that was meant to go alongside the city while keeping most of that storyline intact. I love the evolving take on one idea since I feel it's so revealing of his person and mind. It shows the youth, inexperience, and his adventurous, daring nature at the time of writing Hardboiled Wonderland, which is contrasted so heavily and well with his current respect of time and the appreciation of the imperfect and empty spaces in life and in love. This book covers no new ground for him as a writer, but very excellently demonstrates the honing of his craft into a book that does feel like it has been worked on for 40 years. Compared to his other books, it's got the top notes of Hardboiled Wonderland, the middle notes of A Wild Sheep's Chase, and the bass notes of Killing Commendatore. A lot of his books, like Norwegian Wood, Kafka on the Shore, 1Q84, have their own distinctive DNA, and this book didn't have that. Instead, it blended his existing styles into one that does represent them in a higher achievement, in my opinion. This book was softer, less abrasive, and instead more mature and refined than some of his other flagship novels, and I really appreciated that aspect of it personally. Speaking about what else I enjoyed about this book, we are back in the mountains, and this is where I think his style shines. There is something so perfect about snow that lends itself to the crafting of unreality, and perhaps it's my time spent in mountain towns, but everything he writes here manages to feel so tangible, and I catch myself hanging on every word with each crunchy footstep. And I mean, this book also didn't contain some of his more challenging scenes from his other books, as well as a main character I could actually sympathize with and relate to a lot more. It's incredible how in some of his other books, he can make you feel so frustrated with a character or even disgusted by them, but still want to see them through to the end because they're living, breathing, dynamic, unpredictable characters, and you really don't know what they're going to say or do. Now, there isn't that in this book, but that's more than okay with me. Instead, I find myself being pulled along with the nameless main character a lot more and generally feeling a lot more connected with him emotionally. And this book is calm, it is meditative, and is a wonderful observation on the meaning of love and its experience, all while going into a critical observation of the self and what it means to be tethered to this world. Compared with Hardboiled Wonderland, I think this book is a lot more balanced, and the duality of the two worlds feels much more intertwined in this book. While I found that the contrast of the cyber noir story is jarring, it's fun, it's crazy. The slower, more self observing pace of this book, I think, complements its dual storyline a lot more. And while I do think Hardboiled Wonderland is a lot of fun, I am willing to make that trade off for what feels to me a book that's more whole and asks a lot more questions. This book released 6 years after his last novel, Killing Commendatore. Some might cringe at me saying this, but it's of a very similar slow pace, and I do think it manages to execute it much better, however. But that does bring me to what I didn't like about this novel. While being great in isolation, I am burdened by my previous experience of his novels. Revisit my note breakdown after you read this book and come back and tell me that I wasn't 100% spot on correct about it. There is a justifiable trade off, however, in that you do get to see that growth and maturity of him as a writer, but I can't help but wonder how I would feel about this book if I'd read it first. I truly love this kind of writing from him, but since you might already have an understanding of the story of the city, it's going to be tough to shake that feeling of familiarity and understanding of the story, its whole flow and direction. And that's the interesting fork in the stream. If you never have read any of his books prior, this would be a whole new world for you. And I somewhat envy you, since you can experience what is essentially three of my favorite books by him wrapped up with a pretty bow, into one that I prefer to all of them. I've read every one of his books, so to me, this feels like an album of greatest hits, on a final tour where he's finally learned how to sing each and every lyric with an understanding that only looking back on your career can bring. Is it an amazing performance? Of course it is. Yeah, of course, but there's something about an artist pushing himself into new unexplored territory, like 1Q84, Norwegian Wood, Kafka, that just isn't there in this book. But, that wasn't his goal in the first place. This book was for him, revisiting an idea that's been stuck in his own consciousness for over 40 years and finally executed in what I hope, for his sake, is the best of his ability. The thing is I've heard the song before multiple times. I'm less interested in it now. Uh, it's more for me to show to you, my children. You're my children in this analogy, so that later down the line, I can show you the greatest hits album, maybe get you into some of his books, and then you'd read all the other ones. But it's we've heard this song before and we've seen this dance. It's hard to feel like this is a new book. So did it live up to being my most anticipated book of 2024? I was so excited for it. And yes, this was my favorite book that has released this year, and partly because this is the first time I've gotten to enjoy a release of his. I read my first novel, 1Q84, in March of last year, and then every other book he's released in the 2 months after that. And I think this book might be even more exciting for you if you've never gotten into any of his other works, or only one or two of them so far. So if you're new to his books, I'd heavily, heavily, heavily recommend picking up this one next, because especially because you're not gonna get to be so early on a book of his for a while after this. So go for it. I promise you will enjoy it. I think this will be a book that improves with time, partly due to the meditation on time passing present in this book, but also because it does encapsulate him so well as an author. It's just jazz, cats, and confusion. It's what he does best, and it's what we love from him. This book felt very comfy, very cozy, and very him to me, and I enjoyed that very much. Where I'd throw this on a tier list compared with his other books, since I felt as though I'd read this book before, even before I'd opened it, I'm going to put it in A tier, above those that influenced it so heavily. However, it would not shock me at all if someone who reads this before those puts it into S tier. But since I have already read it before, it just didn't hit me the same way as maybe it would on the first time through. So we're going to put it A tier. And if you would like to pick this book up, which I would recommend, it was my favorite release of this year so far. There's a link for that in the description if you want to support me. It's absolutely free, and I appreciate it very much. I hope you enjoyed this book. Please let me know how you liked it. I have no one to talk about this book with, and I am dying to talk about it with someone. So let me know if you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you later. See you around.